So today's talk is what makes one a Buddhist. It's a question that I often have people ask me. When can I call myself a Buddhist? And you can call yourself a Buddhist anytime you like. But whether you're a Buddhist or not is a completely different question. When I first heard the Dhamma some years back, I was traveling in India, and I happened to end up in the same place at the same time that the Dalai Lama was giving some teachings. So I went to listen to these teachings, and at one stage the Dalai Lama asked who would like to come forward, take refuge in the Triple Gem, and to take the 5 precepts. So, being fairly impressed by some of the things I'd heard His Holiness speaking about, I went forward and very dutifully, very respectfully took refuge in the Triple Gem, went on the 5 precepts, and that night there was a group of us who had all basically become Buddhists that day, and we went to the bar to celebrate. So we hadn't quite got the concept of what being a Buddhist was all about. You know, we're just excited about this new religion that we had come to know. But we had very little understanding of what it meant to be a Buddhist. Now, a lot of people, they say to me, "Oh yeah, I'm a Buddhist. I was born in Sri Lanka. I'm a Buddhist. I was born in Thailand. I'm a Buddhist. I was born in Myanmar." You know, if you're born in Sri Lanka, that actually makes you a Sri Lankan. If you're born in Thailand, it makes you Thai. I mean, I was born in a hospital. I'm not a doctor. So, you know, even the Buddha himself said that it's not by your caste that one becomes a Brahmin. You know, it's got nothing to do with who your mother or who your father is. But a lot of people are convinced that because they are born in a particular country, it makes them a particular religion. You know, we see it not just with Buddhists, we see it with Christians. You know, I've worked with a lot of people from countries like Spain. Spain is a Catholic country. So as soon as you ask them, you know, they say, "I'm a Catholic, I'm from Spain." It's like, no, you're not, you're Spanish. You know, it's got nothing to do with your birth. It's got nothing to do with your caste. But people are fairly convinced that it is. Yeah. When I first became a Buddhist, I was really happy with Buddhism, because Buddhism was a religion that, according to the Western mindset, wasn't full of thou shalt nots. For anybody who's familiar with the Bible, we have thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not do much at all, you know. And we found that Buddhism wasn't all about thou shalt not. It seemed to be more about it's probably best if you don't. You know. And so there wasn't a lot of change in my life when I first became a Buddhist. You know, I was still drinking, I was still partying. You know, that hippie type lifestyle I'd been leading was still there. You know, I just wanted to have fun. And but of course I was telling everybody that I was a Buddhist. And occasionally people would say to me, you know, when I was partying hard, and people would say, "Yeah, I thought you said you were a Buddhist." And I just look at them and say, "I didn't say I was a good Buddhist. It's okay," you know. And that was always my stock answer, you know, because, you know, they'd say, "Oh, I thought Buddhists weren't allowed to drink." It's like, well, no, it's best that we don't drink. But there's nothing that says we're not allowed to drink. You know, people, oh, cool religion. And so there wasn't a lot of difference in my behavior, you know, because I didn't understand what it meant to be a Buddhist. It's actually in the Dhamma 393 that it says, by birth one is no Brahman. People often speak to me today, they look at situations in certain countries. They look at Sri Lanka, they look at Myanmar, and they look at Thailand. And they say, "I thought that's supposed to be a Buddhist country. Why is there so much violence?" You know, why? Sometimes even we look at some of the monks. Oh, I've seen photographs of monks who their eyes are just full of hatred. And I think to myself, that's not what being a Buddhist monk is all about, you know. But they call themselves Buddhists, and of course people look at this and they automatically they judge the whole Buddhist religion on the things that they see on the television, you know. So when you've got one or two monks doing something not particularly nice, they go, "I thought they were supposed to be Buddhist." But their behavior is not Buddhist, you know. When you're preaching hatred, religious intolerance towards other people, that's not what it means to be a Buddhist. And unfortunately that's what the world sees, you know. The world sees the one bad monk and doesn't see all the other monks that are sitting there meditating and studying the Dhamma. I've even had it said, I've had monks tell lay people that they need to respect me because of my robes, but they don't need to listen to me because I'm not a real Buddhist. I'm not from a Buddhist nation, you know. Now anybody who's going to make that sort of comment is so far away from the truth of the Dhamma. You know, it's, as I say, it's got nothing to do with where we're born, you know. Oh yeah. When I was a layperson, I would visit some Buddhist countries. And there's one instance I remember quite clearly. I was catching a taxi from a train station to a particular address. Now, I'd caught a taxi from that address to the train station about a week earlier, and I remember the price quite well. So when I got back to the train station, I went to the taxi rank and I said, "I want to go to such and such a place. And the taxi driver quoted me a price about 3 times higher than what it should have been. And I said to him, no, it's not that much, it's only X amount of money. And he started to argue, so I said to him, well, you can turn the meter on. And I don't know what it is with so many taxis. Meter broken. Every time I try to catch a taxi, meter broken. You know, it's like they need to get those meters fixed. Well, I noticed that there was a Buddha statue on the dashboard of the taxi. So I said to the driver, I said, look, before we continue this discussion any further, I said, maybe we take the Buddha statue, I said, off the dashboard, I said, and put it in the glove compartment. I said, because I'm not convinced it's a good idea to lie in front of the Buddha. Well, he looked at me and he went, oh, are you a Buddhist? I went, oh, in that case, he was only going to charge me a fraction more than he should have been. And I said to him, the precepts don't say not to steal from Buddhists. I said, it says me to abstain from stealing. You know, you've got it wrong. And so even the concept of the precepts is confused. You know, we just took refuge here a few minutes ago, and we took the 5 precepts. But actually taking the 5 precepts, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha, doesn't make you a Buddhist unless those words mean something. You know, if we just come into the temple, we just come into the centers and we repeat something by rote because it's what we always do and it has absolutely no meaning, we might as well not say it. You know, and we see this all of the time. It becomes a religious experience and it's got nothing to do with the Dhamma. You know, I've seen, well, when I became a Buddhist and I started to, you know, I wanted to be a little bit serious about my practice. So I had a little Buddha statue in my room. And I would take 5 precepts when I got up in the morning. Monday to Thursday, I would take 5 precepts. Friday and Saturday, I'd take 4. Because I'd kind of figured if I didn't want to break the precepts. So I thought there's a good chance on a Friday, Saturday. A few beers with the boys after work, you know. So I wouldn't take the 5th precept, you know. Better not to take it than it was to break it. So again, this is just playing with the precepts, you know. And I've been in temples where people have come into the temple to take the 5 precepts. And it's funny, I was talking to Ajahn Brahms about this the other day. And as soon as I started talking, he knew exactly where I was going with this one. He's seen it himself. You know, everybody sat there, you know, they're like, you know, and then you get to the, you know, like Sura, Mera, and you see this habit. The fingers go down. And it's like in the West, when we're making a promise that we have no intentions of keeping, we cross our fingers. It's like, I'm saying it, but I don't mean it. It's okay. Or they would cough. You know, you'd be like, you know, Mary and everybody in your head. No, I didn't say it. I don't need to. I've actually seen people walk out from the Vihara after taking 5 precepts, go straight to their car and start drinking, you know. So the precepts have had absolutely no meaning whatsoever. for these people. It's just become they're hollow words. So when we take the precepts have to mean something to us. So, when can I call myself a Buddhist? The first thing that we need to do is we need to listen to the Dhamma. That's what started me on my path. I heard the Dhamma, and so that's the first step. We have to listen to the Dhamma, but we have to make sure, and this can be quite difficult, it has to be the true Dhamma. There are a lot of teachers out there who will say things to keep the audience happy, But that's not the way the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught people so that they could attain enlightenment. So he taught the truth, And today there's a lot of monks who just teach so that they become popular and they have big audiences, But they're not teaching the true Dhamma. And so it's very important that when we start to listen to the Dhamma, it's true Dhamma. But as I say, that can be quite difficult when you're very new to Buddhism to know. You would expect if you go into a temple, you're going to be given the true Dhamma, But there's a lot of what I call it Dhamma light. It's like here in Malaysia, you have some beer. You can buy some beer in this country that's got no alcohol in it, So it's kind of got the flavour of beer, but it's not beer. And you get Dhammas exactly the same. It's kind of got the flavour, but it's not the true Dhamma. But we're lucky today because we have the suttas, So we can always refer back. We can listen to what the monk has to say or to what the teacher has to say, and then we can refer it back to the suttas. And if it agrees with what the suttas have to say, then we can accept it as something that the Buddha taught. If it doesn't agree with what the suttas have to say, then we have to make a decision. Do we want to go along with the teaching that we've just heard, or are we going to go back to the teachings of the Buddha? So it's got to be the true Dhamma. So once we listen to the Dhamma, we start to develop saddha. Saddha is confidence. Confidence in the Buddha, confidence in the Dhamma, and confidence in the Arya Sangha. And this confidence will become an unshakable confidence. We will start to understand what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. Because not everything we get taught is going to lead to wholesomeness. It might seem nice, but it's not going to lead us anywhere. And so it's very important that we develop this confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. So this is the saddha that we develop. We need to investigate the Dhamma. This is one thing that, the Buddha did teach us. It's this ehipassiko, to come and to see. This So this isn't just listening to somebody, but this is investigating it. You know, a lot of people, they use the Kalama Sutta incorrectly. The Kalama Sutta is a very popular sutta for people who want to pick and choose what the Dhamma actually says, and it's a horribly misinterpreted sutta, and it's a sutta where they often only say a small piece of the sutta, you know, what I call cut and paste Buddhism. They take a little piece that they like and they just leave everything behind. We need to investigate the Dhamma, and when we start to investigate the Dhamma, we see, is this wholesome? Or is it not wholesome? If it's wholesome, we can accept it. If it's unwholesome, then we're going to reject it, because the Buddha didn't teach us anything that was unwholesome. He only taught the wholesome side of the Dhamma. And so we need to practice. But as we start developing the confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, we find that we start to have a look at our morality, our sila. You know, for a lot of our lives, well, for me personally, I was a pretty selfish person, you know. Everything was about me and my happiness. Even if my happiness meant making you miserable, as long as I was happy, you know. If you had a bag of drugs and I didn't have a bag of drugs, well, if I stole your bag of drugs, that was your problem. I had a bag of drugs, I was a happy person, you know. Just because you had no drugs to smoke, that was your problem, you know. We're even taught from a young age to beat the other person, to be the best, to be number one. I used to get told it didn't matter whose toes you stood on to get to the top, as long as you got to the top, you know. It was all about the self. You know, it was all about selfishness. But as we start to understand the teachings of the Buddha, we realize it's supposed to be about selflessness, not selfishness. And one of the first things we start to develop is generosity. Because right from when we're about this big, we stop being generous. You know, you've got all your toys there. You know, you've got 150 different toys spread out on the floor, and you're playing with one, and another child comes in and picks up one of your toys, and it's like, that's my toy. And you will do anything to make sure that the other child doesn't play with your toy. Even though you don't want to play with it, it doesn't matter. It's mine. You can't have it. And so we start to develop this selfishness from a very, very young age, you know. And then, of course, we take it through our school days, you know, where we're taught to be competitive, you know, on the sports field, in the examination room. Everything's about being the best, being number one, you know. And then we get a job, and, you know, it's like we want to climb the ladder, and it doesn't matter. We will lie our way to the top if we need to, you know. As long as we get to the top and get the wage increase and extra holidays and company car. So we will lie and cheat our way to the top, you know. We've always been very selfish people. And so when we come to Buddhism, we start to practice Dhamma. And of course one of the most simple forms of practicing dana is when you see the monk walking down the road first thing in the morning with his alms bowl, we put some food in it. So that's taking food away from ourselves and giving it to another person. That's generosity. It's one of the easiest forms of generosity that you can practice as a Buddhist is, not so easy here in Malaysia. There's not a lot of monks doing pindabat for some reason. But it happens. You see people coming into the temple and they give. They're cooking food for the monks. They're taking care of the monks. When you see the beggar sitting at the side of the road with his little polystyrene cup, so many times you're like, get a job. The guy's got no legs and one arm. He's not going to get a very good job, is he? But we don't want to give him a couple of ringgit. I worked hard for my money. But we can drop a few coins into the beggar's cup. People say, it's his karma to be a beggar. I hear this all the time. Don't give him money, it's his karma to be a beggar. It's like, well, you've just come across this beggar. How about creating some virtuous karma for yourself? Give him a couple of ringgit. Stop being so stingy. So we start to develop this generosity by practicing a little bit of dana, And of course this doesn't mean that we go stupid, It's like you don't go and give away the family fortune. That's not what the Buddha taught. The Buddha always taught us to be a little bit smart when it came to that sort of thing. Like with the householder, he didn't want you giving away so much money that you couldn't afford to feed your family or pay your rent. That's just silly giving. But we give away little bits, and through that practice, selflessness starts to come up. The ego starts to die down. This concept of it's my money, or it's my time. That's another way of dana, time. People come into the temple and they do little jobs here and there, or I don't know if you have them here in Malaysia, but like in New Zealand and places, you have these charity shops and very cheap clothing and stuff that people have donated. And all the staff that work in these shops are unpaid staff, They do 2 or 3 hours a day, 2 or 3 days a week. This is dana, This is generosity. This is giving of their time, and this, and this is to raise money to go towards various charities. They sell the clothes off cheap, and the money all goes to, the Heart Foundation or, cancer research, something like this. This is selflessness. These people expect nothing in return. And that's one very important thing when we're giving. When we give expecting nothing back. I've seen people giving, waving around 100 ringgit note. So, I'm just going to go and give this to the donation box anonymously. No, you're not. You've just told everybody you're going to go and give this 100 ringgit anonymously. It doesn't work like that, There used to be one temple I used to be at, and on the Buddha days, on the full moon days, the lay people used to come and they'd take the 8 precepts. And there used to be a guy sitting up the front. He had this pad. He's a very important man. And people would go off and they'd give him some money, and he'd write it on the book. And then at the end of the chanting and stuff, he would have the microphone, and then he'd start reading out the people's names and how much they'd given, And I used to think to myself, well, that's your merit gone. You've just used it. By actually wanting to have it advertised, what you've just given to the temple, any virtuous merit, you just used it up on your ego, on letting everybody know what you've done. That's not giving selflessly. That's giving to get yourself a name, And so we have to learn that when we give expecting nothing in return. Of course you do get things in return, because you're doing a very virtuous act. And so we give quietly, and we do accumulate virtuous merit. But we're getting rid of the ego, and that's what Buddhism's about. Getting rid of the I. It's that I that keeps us on the cycle of samsara. This constant I, this constant ego, it's, the love of the I that keeps us going round and round and round, So when we start to give, this starts to go away. And then the morality side kicks in. The precepts take on meaning. I've sat there in temples during the chanting, listening to people swatting mosquitoes. And you turn around afterwards, they've got little piles of mosquitoes and they're counting, they're having a competition, see who killed the most mosquitoes during the chanting session, It's like, no! We're not supposed to be harming living beings. Oh, it's only a mosquito. It's like, doesn't matter. I've seen monks sitting there with, you got those electric things, they look like a tennis racket. Monks sitting there in the temple going, grrrt. Come in, mozzies. But the precepts, we're supposed to try and keep them to the best of our ability, We've got sprays we can put on ourselves, The mosquitoes don't like it, but it doesn't kill them. But they won't bite you. So we start to practice the precepts because we start to understand that as I want to be happy, so do all other living beings want to be happy, And so we try to the best of our ability. And I always say to the best of our ability because we make mistakes. We are human. We have failings from time to time, Sometimes it's like, you're sitting there, oh, dang. Though actually, that's not quite intentional, because half the time you're not even thinking when you swat a mosquito. You're not thinking, there's a mosquito on my arm and I am going to kill it right now. You just feel something and it's like, well, oops. But we can make mistakes. When I did start out in Buddhism, and sometimes, I would have taken 5 precepts and then I'd find myself having a beer on a hot summer's evening. I'd forgotten completely that I'd taken the 5 precepts. And you're just like, oh, darn. I blew it. But that's okay, We just try harder the next time, We don't go beating ourselves up. We don't go carrying around a big bag of guilt because we got it wrong, So when we break the precepts, and we know we've broken the precept, we just try a little bit harder the next time to keep the precepts. But when we're keeping the precepts, it is an act of selflessness. It's selfless not to harm living beings. It's selfless not to steal. The hardest one is the one on speech. Because everybody says, they say, oh yeah, it's, they say false speech, you're not allowed to tell lies. But it's harsh speech. Now even that one's not too difficult to keep. No harsh speech. Divisive speech, even that, can be relatively easy to stick to. But the fourth part of that particular precept, gossip. Don't we love to have a good gossip? Yeah? And the conversation always starts off with, I'm not one to gossip, but. We love a good little, But gossip hurts people, because quite often what we're gossiping about is untrue. We've heard something. Always starts off, don't tell anybody, keep this a secret just between us. It's like, yeah, right. You'll be on the telephone within a nanosecond of hanging up from this conversation, So we need to stop gossiping about people, because, I've seen instances where, young teenagers have had people gossip about them. The gossip's been totally untrue, yet the teenagers committed suicide because of what's been said. Our tongues can cause so many problems, that we're not even aware of, So it's extremely important that morality is developed in a big way. And then once we develop morality, then we have samadhi. When we want to start meditating, you can't meditate without morality. It's not possible. And then panya, the wisdom, starts to arise. And you find yourself starting to associate with good friends, spiritual friends, And those things of the world start to lose interest for you. We let go of greed. I won't bother with all the Pali. We let go of greed, we let go of hatred, and we let go of delusion. So we become non-greedy, non-hating, and non-delusional people. And when we start to get rid of things like anger, hatred, and delusion, we become nicer people to be around. And we're actually practicing the Dhamma according to the Buddha. When we start to practice the Dhamma according to the Buddha, that is when you can call yourself a Buddhist. So we need to start to practice the Dhamma according to the Dhamma. That's the important part. Practicing it according to the teachings. Not practicing it according to the way that it feels good for you or I. Because sometimes practicing the Dhamma doesn't always feel good. There's a lot of sacrifice that we start to make, Feels a bit difficult sometimes. But the more we practice it, the more we see just how easy it is. So when we start to practice the Dhamma according to the Dhamma, when our precepts, when our morality means something to us, when we start to feel a sense of shame. Now note, shame, not guilt. I don't talk about guilt here. Guilt's a stupid emotion. So if anybody's got guilt, chuck it out, because it's ridiculous. But when we break the precepts, we start to feel a sense of shame that we broke it, And that sense of shame, what it does is it encourages us to try harder. That's all it is. It just encourages us to try harder to live by the precepts. And when we've got that, then we can call ourselves Buddhists. Thank you.